Okay, good day. So for today, we are going to have an introduction about organic chemistry. So we all know when we say organic chemistry, it is a branch of chemistry that studies the structure, properties, and reactions of organic compounds which contains carbon in a covalent bonding. So exactly. So when we say organic chemistry, it's something to do with a carbon. Carbon is the most important thing we have in an organic chemistry. Okay, let us try to remember when we see carbon, carbon has four valence electrons, and it means we have four ways to connect to carbon. Okay? It has four ways to bond with carbon. So let us try to know the four ways to show the structure of a let us go with the four ways on how a molecule can be represented. So in a four ways we have here the molecular formula, the structural formula, the condensed structural formula, and the skeletal formula, which is the last. So let us take it one by one. So let us have an example of C4H10. Okay. So we have C4H10. So C4H10 is the typical molecular formula that we always see. So usually we see on a textbook. So makikita natin to. So ito yung tawag dito is a molecular formula. Now, next, let us try to find what is the structural formula of this C4H10. Okay, the structural formula, so it means we have four carbon, meaning we have four carbon can be written into like this. Then we have 10 molecules of hydrogen. So we let us remember, sabi ko nga kanina, si carbon has four ways to connect or four ways to bond with other molecules. So other atom rather, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that means we have one hydrogen here, 2, and 3. Then we have only 2 kasi may na-connect na siya dito. So 1 and 2. Then another 2, 1, and 2. Let's try to count. We have 4 carbons and 10 hydrogen. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And that makes the structural formula of C4H10. Okay, yan po ang ating structural formula. So, wag pong magkakamali this way. This is the structural formula. Now, next. How about, ma'am, the condensed structural formula? Okay, in a condensed structural formula, yan po. So, let us try to look or base it from our structural formula. So, first, write the first part na makikita natin sa structure. So, we have C, the carbon, and 3 hydrogen. We have here CH3. Then the second one, we have another C, then 2 hydrogen. Then the third is C again with 2 hydrogen. And last is C with a 3 hydrogen. So, ito yung reason bakit may iba tayong nakikita. 'Di ba? May nakikita tayong katulad ni acetic acid. So, minsan nakikita natin ng ganito. So, minsan nakikita natin yung pinaka-molecular formula. So, it's the same. So, this is like a condensed structural formula. This one is called condensed structural formula where it is based on the structural formula niya. Okay, so how about the last? Ma'am, the skeletal formula. And this is related to our next lesson. Our skeletal formula, let me move this one, is something to do with a lines or diagram. And I don't know, it cannot be diagram. It's only a lines structure or simply by skeletal. Ito yung usually na nakikita natin sa mga prescription doon sa may mga gamot na parang web-like structure. So, let us have this one. So, dahil structural formula, let's just count how many carbons. Ilan ang carbon? So, dahil 4, let us stick with 4 structure. So, 1, 2, 3, 3 lines. Ma'am, bakit hindi 4? Because every endpoint po represents for a carbon. Okay? And sabi ko nga sa ating kaninang sample molecular formula, so we have only 4 carbons. Then by that, just simply looking at this, it is already connected with a hydrogen. So, nakakonect na yan na hydrogen, 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 ano po na, hydrogen, kay hydrogen, 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 and hydrogen, hydrogen, and hydrogen. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that is the same with the structure. So, ang pinagkaiba lang, kapag line structure or skeletal structure, wala po itong makikita. Okay? So, ito lang ang makikita natin. And that, if we solve this kind of structure, it simply means 4 carbons and each or 10 hydrogen. So, ganyan. So, the next thing that we're going to discuss is about this. That's the reason we just have a recap of what this kind of structure. Kasi meron nagtatanong sa akin, ma'am, ano po bang pinagkaiba? Nilabas that structure, ganyan, pag may nakikita. So, may mga ibang term na nalilito tayo. So, pag structural formula is ganito. Pag skeletal formula, pag is ganito, ganitong like skeletal. Pag structural formula is ito yung last time na pinagawa ko sa inyo, yung parang Lewis dot structure or Lewis structure kind. Yan. And the condensed formula structure is this one. Okay? So, clear po tayo. So, before we go with the functional groups, ito yung ating diniscuss. Okay, so this line structure is something to do with hydrocarbons. So when we say hydrocarbons is any of class organic chemical compounds that compose of only of the elements that is carbon and hydrogen. So it is carbon atoms joined together to form the framework of the compound. So usually pag nakakita tayo na ganito, so alam na natin na it is hydrocarbons we can see C as X and H as 1. So we always found this kind of molecular formula, this one. So that is under hydrocarbons. So hydrocarbons have different kinds. So let us go with first one. We have alkanes, where alkanes has a single bond of carbon, this one. And that is an alkanes. While alkenes has a double bond structure of a carbon. So like that. So first alkane, single bond, and alkenes has double bond. While the next one, we have alkynes, and alkynes has a triple bond structure of a carbon. So let us repeat, ha? So let us repeat para hindi malilito. So when we say alkanes, alkanes has single bond structure of a carbon. When we say alkenes, we have two bond structure of a carbon. And when we say alkynes, it has at least three bond structure of a carbon. So just don't forget that A and E, anes as single, ins as double, and ines as the triple bond structure of a carbon. So this is something to do with the longest bond structure, katulad ng ginawa natin kanina, yung C4H10. So as you can see with the line structure formula, so we have 1, 2, 3. So with H, H, and H. So ito yung line structure natin. So, napaka-haba or napaka-longest line structure. So, for this, so we have the called substituent, where the one line of a hydrogen replaces and turns into a new form. So, ayan. Magkakaroon tayo ng new form bond here. So that's called substituent. And this substitution is something to do with the functional groups that we are talking about a while ago. Yung nasa lesson number 7 natin, which we have the functional group. Most common substituent, I will be flashing it here. So we have the 1C methyl. It means only one line that connected to the substituent, and when it becomes two, meaning two carbons connected to the substituent, it is under ethyl group. Now if it becomes is a three bond structure of a C, 1 2 3 C carbon, it is under a propyl, and with another one C lines the structure, it is under a butyl group, and that is more on alkyl groups, which is under the common substituents. So may I repeat? So let's have the common substituents under alkyl groups. When we have one carbon, it is a methyl group, and when it is another one carbon, it represents two carbon, it is under a ethyl group. And when we have another one carbon, it is under, or meaning three presence of carbon, it is under a propyl group, and one another carbon, it represents for the butyl group. And that sums up with our alkyl group. Sorry naman, pangit yung ating structure. So, ganyan yun. Bibilang natin by endpoints para malaman yun yung carbon. So, 1, 2, 3, 4. So, last time, di ba, it is for hydrogen part. So, this time, dahil substituent siya, it represents for the carbon. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's now go with the functional group. When we say functional group, is the specific type of substituent that is attached to the carbon chain group. Okay? So dito yung functional group katulad ng example natin kanina. So before we go on with the different functional group, let us go with what do you mean by R group? So, usually nakikita natin yan sa mga structural formula, sa skeletal formula rather. What is R group? So, when we see R group, it is something to do with rest of the molecule. Okay? So, R means rest of the molecule. So, ipapakita natin yun. So let us go first with a first functional group, which we have alkene. And we remember a while ago, when we try to remember, when we see alkene, it is something to do with two bond of carbon. So when this is type of, when we have this kind of structural skeletal formula, so let's just have like this. And that represents for the alkene. Then next, let us go with the alkyne. So when we try to remember, when we say alkyne, it is a triple bond structure of a carbon. So kapag triple bond structure, so dadagdagan pa natin siya ng isang structure. And that represents for the alkyne. So let us go for next with the alkyl halide. So alkyl means it represents for the carbon and an hydrogen. Now, halide represents for halogens. So, when we have this kind, we have an X, meaning X is, it can be chlorine and bromine. So, that is under a bond structure. Ayan po. Yan yung alkyl. Well, alkyl means carbon and hydrogen, and halide represents for the halogen. So, ganyan yung structure natin. Ito yung R, lumabas yung rest of the molecules natin. So, ito yung R, rest of the molecules, and this one represents, X represents for a chlorine, bromine, or any halogen, sorry. So, next, let us have with an alcohol, where has alcohol has an OH group represents. So, gayang structure. Then, we have an OH group. Then, R is an OH. So, ganyan po represents for the alcohol under functional group. So, pag nakakita tayo ng ganyang skeletal formula, so that represents for an alcohol. Let us have an ether group. So, ether group is something to do with an oxygen. So, erase ko lang po. So, oxygen where we have it between of a 2R group. And apostrophe to the other R represents for another molecule. So let's have this structure. So yung structure niya, it can be like this. So like that. That represents for an ether group where it was rounded with 2R. So R and another one is R with an apostrophe that represents for another group. So ganyang structure ang makikita natin when it comes with an ether group. Go next with epoxide, where you can see epoxide is surround with have an R group, 2 carbons, and an oxygen in the middle of it. So when we have a skeletal formula of this, it will have this kind of image. So, ganyan po siya. So next, we have a ketone where we have a structural formula like this. So we have the R group and the apostrophe R, meaning the other group of rest of the molecules, then the carbon in the middle, and a double bond of an oxygen. So when we have a skeletal formula of this, we will have this kind of image or structural formula. So O, and po yung line. Okay? Next is the aldehyde. So aldehyde is something similar with a ketone, but the difference is it is something to do yung isang R group represents now for an hydrogen. So this one like this in this skeletal formula, ayan po ang itsura niya. So kanina kay ketone is walang nakalagay na hydrogen o walang presence ng hydrogen. Only 2 R groups or ang meron tayo. Now, meron na tayong hydrogen. So para matandaan natin between ketone and aldehyde, remember hide, something to do with has an hydrogen on it. Okay. Now, next is the carboxylic acid. So, same with the aldehyde, but this time, hindi na si hydrogen yung kasama niya. Ang kasama niya po is si hydroxide, the OH. Yan, kanina hydrogen lang kasama. Ngayon, let's have an hydroxide or OH that we will have the carboxylic group. So, ganyan po siya. Then next, let's have an ester group. So same lang din, yun nga lang, dun nga lang din tayo mag-iiba dito sa last. So dito, meron tayong presence ng oxygen, and after oxygen, we have an apostrophe R, represents for another R. So same with this, and that like that. So ganyan po ang itsura ng ester group. Oh, next, let us have we had amide, where amide is something to do with the same structure, a double bond of an oxygen, but this time, so hindi na oxygen yung kasama niya dito. So that has a nitrogen that is double bonded with an oxygen. So this time, so dito meron tayong presence ng NH2 or the nitrogen. So, yan yung tinatawag nating structure na amide. Then next, let's have an amine. So, hindi ko mahanap, sorry ha. So, let's have an amine where something same with amide, but this time, so mawawala yung double bond structure of oxygen with the carbon and only our group with an NH2. So, skeletal formula natin is mababago din into this. Tanggalin yung double bond structure ng oxygen. And that represents for the amine. So, yun yung pinagkaiba na wala yung double bond structure ni oxygen with the carbon. Ayan po. So, for you to familiarize, ano yung pinagkaiba ni amide kay amine is, when we say amine, it is minimal bond structure of the carbon with the nitrogen. While the amide, sabi nga natin, may double bond structure ni oxygen with 1 carbon. Have the phenyl group which represents a benzene ring. So, yung parang Piatos type. So, yan yung benzene ring connected with the R, which is the rest of the molecule, and its skeletal formula looks like this. So, benzene ring or this kind of skeletal formula may also be also called of aromatic. So it can be a benzene ring or an aromatic. Same with this. So let us have this kind of a skeletal formula. Let us try to identify each functional group in in the following molecule. So by just looking at this, we can try to identify ano yung mga na functional group. So first, this one. So it is a benzene ring, di ba? But also, let us have the so-called aromatic. Okay. Next, so there is a presence of OH group, and that is represents for an alcohol. Now next, this one, this two, a line structure between an oxygen, it is under ether. The next, this one, O, double bond structure of oxygen with the presence of hydrogen, it is under aldehyde. So by this, we have identified the different functional group that is present on a skeletal formula like this. So, medyo confusing sa umpisa, but sabi ko nga sa inyo, let us try to have a memorization ng mga skeletal formula ng mga functional groups natin. So, let us have another one. Ayan. Try to answer this one. Try to answer what are the different functional group that is present on this formula. So let's have this one. So let us try to answer this one first. So we have an OH group. So ano yan? Alcohol ba yan? Let us try to look. It is connected with the double bond structure of an oxygen. So meaning it is not an alcohol. But just looking at this, by just looking this formula, it means it is not an alcohol. So it is an under carboxylic acid. So next, so let us have this one, the HO, or pwede naman ng OA. And that is the alcohol, where OH is connected to a benzene ring, and that is alcohol. Next, so this one, nabanggit na natin. So it is a benzene ring, or the aromatic. Next, we have an NH2. NH2 with this kind of structure. So it is amide. So in this type, we have identified the different functional group on this kind of setup. So let us try to have this that can be answered by no. So I will just be giving you an sample, or any questions would be entertained sa ating GC or sa ating through PM. So kung anong gusto nyo. So any correction, I will be stand corrected. Basta sabihin nyo sa akin. So pasensya na kung um, masyadong maganda yung mga drawing ko. Alam nyo naman na isang magaling na drawing artist ang yung teacher. Okay, thank you. And sana na intindihan nyo ang ating functional groups. So, it's something to do with memorization of the different skeletal formula ng mga ang ating mga molecular formula. So, sana walang nalito. So, just try to remember lang. Okay, pati yung module gamitin nyo para ma-check kung ano yung. Actually, marami pang different functional groups, but these are the most common functional groups that we use in an organic chemistry. Okay, thank you.